Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review, a classic review, of Nas's Illmatic. Nas, aka Nasty Nas, is a New York rapper, and this is his 1994 debut album. The 20th anniversary of this record just passed, and with every new year, this thing's reputation as a pinnacle of New York hip-hop grows. Sadly, this is a high watermark that Nas has sort of failed to reach again later in his career. However, it's nothing to hold against him because it's very few rappers that actually have a record as great as Illmatic under their belts. New York hip-hop in the 90s is an era of the genre that over the years has been defined by boom-bap drums, gritty descriptions of city life, but it's not a trend that would be in full swing until the release of albums like Stress and 36 Chambers and Die and Back the Fuck Up, the main ingredient, the infamous, and of course, Illmatic. Now, New York saw its share of mean and very masculine and braggadocious rappers throughout the 80s, people like KRS-One and Cool G Rap, as well as Chuck D, of course Run DMC and Rakim of Eric B and Rakim, and of course the West Coast had delivered its share of very vulgar, violent, and tooth-gnashed records up until that point as well. The Chronic and Straight Outta Compton and Ice Cube's debut. The West Coast made hip-hop so much more aggressive, so much dirtier, and New York hip-hop artists were responding to that while simultaneously sticking to the kind of detailed storytelling and vivid wordplay and word usage that New York had come to be known for. Now, Nas didn't just pull this album together by himself. He had some of the best and brightest of New York's hip-hop scene working with him on this project, people like Q-Tip, also Pete Rock, DJ Premier, and Large Professor brought all the instrumentals, these really jazzy loops, very beefy, crunchy drums backing those loops up. Also, MC Search of Third Bass fame executive produced this album. Back to the instrumentals though. The beats on this thing are great. They're simple but effective. They perfectly set the tone for what Nas is saying on this record. Like on New York State of Mind, where we get a slinky, upright bass line, this very sour piano chord that repeats every bar, just sticking out. Occasionally, these skipping, echoed guitar notes, which I think are guitar notes, ring out very eerily. The drum beat brings a great groove. Each element of what's going on in this beat adds so much character to the song. The very smooth and jazzy and sweet instrumental on Life's a Bitch contrasts very nicely to the very morbid point of view of the song. The World Is Yours has a golden hook on it. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. An amazing couple of piano samples layered over one another, which are so pretty, they're so fluid, they're so key to the song, but it's crazy to think that these little sections of piano were merely just embellishments or passages on the way to something else. 5 minutes into the song I Love Music by the Ahmad Jamal Trio. The beat on Halftime, it's loud, it's brazen. The drums are some of the just heaviest, nastiest on the entire record, and the very bright horns that pop up on the hook really give the song some flavor, especially since with the verses, the song tends to be so skeletal, which just enhances those horns when they pop in. There is surprisingly a thumb piano sample on the song One Love, which it's a catchy little melody, but it's sort of something unique for its time as far as hip-hop samples go. But easily one of my favorite instrumentals in the list here has to be for the song Represent. It sounds like an icy New York morning, 7 a.m. in the middle of January. The gang vocals on the hook here, represent, represent. Not only can I hear them so clearly, but it's almost as if I'm hearing the frosty breath coming off of those vocals too. And the synths on this thing are just icy as hell. They are ice cold. And the very ethereal ba-da-ba-ba-ba and horns on the closing track here, they seem almost dreamlike in how light and how breezy they are. But the drums and Nas's vocals are just very hard. They're up front, they're in your face. They kind of keep the song grounded in reality. None of the beats on this record change up significantly once they've been sort of giving you a flavor of what they're doing on the first verse and the first chorus. That's pretty much what they're going to do throughout the whole track, which is fine. The beats are simply meant to kind of just play backup to what Nas is doing. And Nas is so captivating of a voice that the beat doesn't really need to distract from what he's doing anyway. On this project, Nas had a never-ending flow and the lyrical content to match. On New York State of Mind, we get these gritty tales of gun-toting gangsters and drugs, money, bass heads selling amps, presumably to get their next fix. But easily my favorite line out of this track is a repeated one where Nas raps about not sleeping because sleep is the cousin of death. However, this track and a lot of other tracks here I don't think boil down to any one single line or anything like that. I think one of the most impressive things about all these songs collectively is that Nas's rapping and his lyrics are so articulate and they flow so logically that what he's saying in his songs is about as easy to follow as like a conversation. Which shows that in his songs he wasn't just there to self-promote. He wasn't just there to brag, he felt he had something to say to the listener, even if that something is as simple as his passion for sneakers or bitches with beepers. The lyrics on the song Life's a Bitch take a kind of defeatist direction. AZ you can hear featured on the hook here, and he yells this hook at the top of his lungs like it's literally going to be the last thing he ever says. And Nas comes in with a verse that's pretty interesting because it sort of flips the narrative of the song. He raps about his age, his birth, how he's lucky to have seen another birthday. He raps about being caught up in drugs and crime, and then eventually something changes and he starts living for the long term, saying that he wants to live for tomorrow, that buck that he spent on the bottle could have won the lotto. It's like in the verse, the one verse he writes on this song, he sort of grows up before our very ears. You could say that the verse doesn't really fit the theme of the song in the way that AZ's verse does, but this could be for a couple of reasons. I mean, Nas maybe is sort of breaking this cycle of death and I guess early death that is rapped about on the song, or maybe he's just kind of the other side of that coin. On the song The World Is Yours, we get another career-defining refrain where Nas is rapping that he wants dead presidents to represent him, which I understand that the idea of dead presidents is pretty cliche today in hip-hop lyricism, but for its time, it was a pretty fucking sick line. And a lot of the lyrics on this track sort of deal directly with Nas's passion for hip-hop and the craft of the genre, rapping about his creative process, notebooks with lyrics going into the margins. The song is essentially kind of about Nas's takeover, or the takeover that he anticipates will happen through his passion for this, through his talent, which I think he proves with 3 very meaty verses. And he proves that again on the song Halftime, which to me this song isn't really about anything as much as it is just kind of Nas delivering some lyrical flash with imagery in this track, like Nas rapping on slave ships, to lines such as, "'Cause I'm an ace when I face the bass." And one of the most unpolitically correct lines on the track actually has some of the most interesting wordplay, where he says his style switches like a faggot, sort of meaning he switches sexual preferences or sexual preference changes, but simultaneously a switch is something that you can hit somebody with a stick, and a faggot is a bunch of sticks. And it must be said that Nas also says in this song that he drops jewels, he wears jewels, but he hopes not to run them. Run those jewels. Run those jewels fast. The album cools down with the song Memory Lane, which takes a little bit of a nostalgic tone, but maybe not as much as I would have liked. Maybe it doesn't really stick out as much as I think a song with this type of angle should, because there's so many other songs on here where in little lyrical bits, in single bars, Nas kind of gives you bits of background when it comes to his passions, his love of hip-hop. And on this track, I guess don't let the nostalgic tone trick you, because there's still some very deadly and violent lyrics in these verses, like which, here's my basis, my razor embraces many faces. It's on the song One Love, though, where I think Nas really proves himself as a storyteller. Not only is he telling tales of the hood where he's from, but he's telling them to someone who's in jail. It's almost as if his buddy's in jail and he's writing a letter to him in these rap verses, which, to be honest, is a pretty sick concept for its time and incredibly well executed. Now, the song Represent stands out to me not just instrumentally, it is one of my favorite instrumentals on the record, but also one of my favorite performances from Nas, because this track sticks out to me as Nas sounding the hungriest on the entire record. His aggressive delivery is just so high intensity on this song. His flow feels a little bit faster too, like he's just trying to pack so many words into his verses. And there are actually a few moments where some sound effects are added in post to sort of add a little bit of character and I guess a background and submersive qualities to what Nas is saying on the song. Of course, there are funny and clever lines on here where he says that he needs the green, but fuck a yard. He's not talking about a yard, you know, how about 100 grand? And the song, it ain't hard to tell the ending here. I mean, it was a single that came out that helped promote Nas and helped him get where he was, and it is a great track, but it's not, you know, I guess that conclusive of an ending, although I guess it is probably lyrically more than it is musically. It still does feel like a very heart-pounding single with a lot of power. It's not really like a goodbye or anything like that. And that's the thing about this record. It's not a lengthy, heady concept album or anything like that. We're still talking about an era of hip-hop here that, while we look back at it lyrically and we appreciate it for how skilled it was in that regard, hip-hop advanced so much further in the next 2 decades when it comes to production and musical qualities. Which, with that stylistic shift, of course, we lost a bit of an emphasis on lyrics, but I still think there are artists out there who are lyrical and do go that extra lyrical mile if you look for them. The golden age of hip-hop, the 80s era of hip-hop, was so rudimentary in a lot of ways, and the 90s, it wasn't too far past it when you sort of look at it with hindsight. And even though this album might not seem as grand as a To Pimp a Butterfly or a My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, it's still a supreme benchmark in the world of hip-hop, especially when it comes to this decade. And it's for one reason and one reason only, in my opinion. All of the slang and the descriptors that we typically use to describe an incredibly talented MC, an incredibly talented rapper, Nas embodies all of them. Not only that, but he lives up to, and in a way this record kind of sets the very standards by which we kind of define great lyricism and great rapping today. Sure, it's not the only album that does that, but it's one of the first that comes to mind. And even though the production is fantastic and does a whole lot with a little, this album is a great reminder of a time when the rapper was the storyteller, the rapper was the spotlight. And I don't mean just kind of in the way that we see somebody like Drake or Future sort of, you know, as this really famous person who is a celebrity while being a rapper. I mean, I'm talking about we are hooked into what Nas is saying. What Nas is saying is primarily the focus of the song. He doesn't need celebrity. He doesn't need infamy. In order for you to be hooked into what he's saying, in order to be engaged with what he's saying, all he needed was a microphone. And that's about it. Anthony Fantano, classic review. Check out this album if you haven't already. It's a fucking great album. Forever.